Eleanor sat on the attic floor, her legs folded beneath her, as she read through the first letter. The inked words blurred as her heart pounded in her chest. My dearest Eleanor, I have loved you for a lifetime, even before you ever existed. If fate is kind, these words will one day find their way to you. And when they do, follow them. Follow me. She skimmed further down, searching for a name, a clue, anything. But the only signature was a single initial.
J.
Eleanor swallowed, flipping to the next letter. Each was dated over 50 years ago, and all addressed to her, as if the writer had known she would exist long before she was even born. Her grandmother had never spoken of a man named J. And yet, in every letter, there was love. A devotion that defied time. Something cold settled in her stomach. This wasn't normal. And then she saw it. Tucked between the letters, beneath the last envelope, was something far older than the rest, a pressed violet, brittle with age. But as she touched the petals, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. The attic around her flickered. The dust, the old trunks, the dim light, all of it warped. And then in an instant it was gone. Eleanor gasped, blinking rapidly as her surroundings shifted. The attic had disappeared. She was outside, standing on a cobblestone path lined with gaslit lanterns. The air smelled of rain and something faintly floral. The sounds of laughter and distant music drifted through the warm night. Her hands trembled as she looked down. The letters were gone. Instead, she wore a dress she had never seen before, a soft, lavender-colored gown that brushed her ankles. The material felt real as the cool breeze against her skin. Panic surged through her. Where was she? Before she could move, a voice called out from behind. Eleanor. Her breath caught. She turned and froze. A man stood before her, tall and familiar, his dark eyes filled with something between relief and awe. He looked no older than 30, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of another era. She had never seen him before in her life. And yet, he was looking at her as if he had been waiting for her forever.
J.
Eleanor's breath came in shallow gasps as she took a step back, her pulse pounding in her ears. The man before her, J, was impossibly real. His dark hair was neatly combed, his suit impeccably tailored, but it wasn't his appearance that unsettled her. It was his eyes. There was something in them, recognition, warmth, longing. As if he had been waiting for her. Eleanor, he said again, softer this time, his voice laced with something unspoken. She swallowed hard. Who are you? Jay frowned, tilting his head slightly. You don't remember? A fresh wave of panic surged through her. Remember what? I don't even know where I am. Jay's expression darkened, as if realization had just struck him. It happened again, didn't it? He murmured. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. I was afraid of this. What happened again? Eleanor demanded. Where am I? And how do you know me? Jay hesitated, studying her face. And then, as if making a decision, he took a slow step forward. You're not supposed to be here yet, he said, voice low and careful. Not like this. Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. That doesn't answer my question. He sighed, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, delicate. A violet. Eleanor's breath hitched. It was the same flower from the letters. The same one she had found in the attic before everything had changed. Jay held it out to her. You found the letters, didn't you? Her throat tightened. How do you? You always do, he interrupted, his voice laced with quiet sadness. Every time. Eleanor shook her head. Every time? What do you mean? Jay hesitated, then said carefully, because this isn't the first time we've met. And it won't be the last. The world tilted beneath her feet. That's not possible. He smiled slightly, though there was something wistful in it. And yet, here you are. Eleanor took a shaky step back. You're saying I've time traveled before? Yes, Jay said simply. And each time you forget. Her head spun. That's insane. I don't. I've never met you before in my life. Jay sighed, his eyes dark with something unreadable. You say that every time, too. Eleanor opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a distant clock tower struck midnight, its chime echoing through the air. Jay's expression shifted, urgency flashing across his face. We don't have much time, he said. You need to come with me. Eleanor hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to wake up from whatever this was. But deep inside, buried beneath the fear and confusion, was something else. A whisper, a memory just out of reach, and a strange, undeniable feeling that, somehow, she had known this man before. That she had loved him before, even if she couldn't remember it yet. Eleanor's heart pounded. Every rational thought screamed at her to run, to wake up from this impossible dream, but something deep inside her rooted her to the spot. Jay watched her carefully, as if afraid she would bolt. Please, Eleanor, he said softly, extending his hand. I can explain everything, but not here. It isn't safe. Her gaze flickered around the unfamiliar street. The gas-lit lanterns cast long, flickering shadows, and the sound of distant laughter drifted from a nearby ballroom. People in elegant 1920s attire strolled along the cobblestone paths, oblivious to her presence. This wasn't a dream. Where are we? She whispered. Jay's lips parted, as if he wasn't sure how much to say. London, 1927. The world seemed to tilt, and Eleanor grabbed a nearby lamppost to steady herself.
No.
That's impossible. Jay exhaled. I know this is overwhelming. It always is. Stop saying that, she snapped, chest heaving. You keep acting like we've done this before. But I don't know you. I don't even know how I got here. Jay hesitated. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached into his pocket again and pulled out something small, a folded letter. He extended it toward her. Her hands trembled as she took it. The paper was aged, the ink slightly faded. She unfolded it carefully, eyes scanning the elegant handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then time has found a way to bring you back to me once more. You may not remember yet, but you have been here before. We have loved before. And we have lost before. But this time, I swear to you, I will not lose you again. The signature at the bottom sent a shiver down her spine. James Sterling. Her breath hitched. The letters she had found in the attic, every single one had been signed with just an initial.
J. James.
Her wide eyes shot to his. You wrote the letters. A small, sad smile tugged at his lips. Yes. Eleanor's pulse hammered. But how? How could you have written to me before I was even born? James hesitated before stepping closer. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against her wrist. A spark of warmth shot through her skin, and in that instant, images flickered in her mind, shadows of something just out of reach. A ballroom, a stolen kiss, a promise whispered beneath the stars. She stumbled back, gasping. What was that? James clenched his jaw, his eyes dark with something unreadable. Memories. Eleanor shook her head wildly.
No.
That's not possible. Those weren't my memories. James' expression was unreadable. They were. No, she swallowed hard. I don't remember you, but your soul does. A chill ran down her spine. What does that mean? James hesitated before answering. It means this isn't the first time we've met.
And it won't be the last.
Eleanor's hands trembled. You said that before. Because it's true. She took a slow step back. You're telling me we what? Keep meeting across time? Yes. And each time, I forget. James' jaw tightened. Yes. Her stomach twisted. Why? A shadow passed over his face. Because something or someone doesn't want you to remember. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What? James took another step toward her, his voice low and urgent. That's why you're here, Eleanor. You were meant to find the letters. You were meant to come back. He exhaled. But this time, we have to break the cycle. She swallowed hard. What cycle? James reached for her hand. His touch sent another jolt through her, and this time, the images came faster, a glimpse of his face in another time, another life. A whispered goodbye. A door slamming shut between them. The scent of violets in the air. Eleanor yanked her hand away, chest rising and falling rapidly. No, she shook her head. This isn't real. James' expression turned solemn. It is. And if we don't stop it, you'll forget me again. You'll wake up in your time, and I'll be nothing but a name on old letters. A lump formed in her throat. She didn't know him, and yet something deep inside her ached at the thought of losing him. James took a slow breath. Please, Eleanor, let me help you remember. Eleanor stared at him, torn between fear and something far more terrifying, recognition. And in that moment, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the first time she had been here.
And it wouldn't be the last.
Eleanor followed James through the quiet streets of 1927 London, her thoughts a tangled mess. The way he looked at her, like she was something precious he had lost, both frightened and intrigued her. He led her to a small bookshop tucked between two buildings, its wooden sign swaying in the gentle breeze. Inside, the scent of old paper filled the air, and candles cast warm glows against the shelves. This place, she whispered, feeling an odd sense of familiarity. James nodded. You loved it. Every time. Eleanor swallowed.
So, what?
You think bringing me here will make me remember? Not just this place, James said, carefully pulling an old book from a nearby shelf. But what's inside? He opened the book to a page where a single pressed violet rested between the pages. Eleanor's breath hitched. James watched her, eyes dark with anticipation. Touch it. She hesitated, then slowly brushed her fingers against the petals. A rush of images flooded her mind. A camel at dinner in this very bookshop, James smiling at her over a glass of wine. A promise whispered in the dead of night. A ring, shining in the candlelight, as James knelt before her. Eleanor staggered back, gasping. James reached for her, steadying her with gentle hands. It's coming back, isn't it? She clutched her head.
No.
I don't know. It's a start, James murmured. But we don't have much time. Eleanor lifted her gaze.
Why?
What happens if I don't remember? James' expression darkened. Then history repeats itself. And you forget me. Again. Her heart twisted at the pain in his voice. But before she could respond, the bell over the shop door jingled. Eleanor turned and froze. A woman stood in the doorway, dressed in an emerald green gown. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Eleanor like a predator spotting prey. James stiffened. Eleanor swallowed. Who is that? James' grip on her hand tightened. That, he said, voice low and tense, is the reason you keep forgetting. Eleanor's pulse pounded as the woman in the emerald gown stepped further into the bookshop. She moved with an eerie grace, her gloved fingers gliding over the book spines as if she had all the time in the world. James stood protectively beside Eleanor, his grip tightening around her wrist. We need to go. The woman's lips curled into a knowing smile. Now, James. We both know that won't work. Eleanor swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at her to run. But something about the woman, her poised confidence, her unnerving familiarity, held her in place. Who are you? She demanded. The woman tilted her head, eyes gleaming with amusement. Oh, Eleanor. Or should I say Miss Worthington? Eleanor stiffened. That's not my name. The woman sighed. Not in this life, no. But once, long ago, you were Eleanor Worthington, the woman James loved. And the woman who defied me. James' jaw clenched. You cursed her. The woman feigned a look of mock offense. Cursed is such a dramatic word. I simply ensured that fate would keep you apart. Her gaze slid back to Eleanor, and for the first time, there was something sharp and dangerous behind her smile. Every time you two find each other, I erase you from his life. Wipe your memories. Send you back where you belong. Eleanor's stomach turned.
Why?
Why do this? The woman sighed, almost as if she were disappointed. Because you were never meant to be with him. And yet, lifetime after lifetime, you find a way back. It's tiresome, really. Eleanor's mind reeled. Who are you? The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. I am the one who keeps time in order. The words sent a chill through Eleanor's bones. James moved in front of her, his posture rigid. Stay away from her. The woman chuckled. Oh, James. Always so protective. Her gaze flickered between them, something sinister lurking in her expression. But you know how this ends. Eleanor will forget, just like she always does. She'll wake up in her time, and you will be nothing but a fleeting memory. Eleanor's breath came fast and shallow. No, she whispered. The woman arched a brow. No. Eleanor turned to James, eyes burning with determination. I don't want to forget. I don't care how many times we've been through this. I won't let her take you away from me. James stared at her, something like hope flickering in his stormy eyes. The woman sighed. How tiresome. She lifted a gloved hand, and the air around Eleanor crackled. A strange force pulled at her, like invisible hands trying to drag her away. No! Eleanor screamed, gripping James' arm. James gritted his teeth, holding on to her with everything he had. Fight it, Eleanor. You have to remember. The woman's voice was cold and final. You never do. Eleanor's vision blurred. The world around her twisted, stretching like a ripple in water. James' desperate voice rang in her ears. Eleanor. Then, darkness. Eleanor woke with a gasp, her body jerking upright. She was in an attic. Her grandmother's attic. The old, dusty letters lay scattered around her, the pressed violet still tucked inside one of them. The golden light of late afternoon streamed through the window, bathing the wooden floor in warmth. For a moment, she sat there, dazed. Had it been a dream?
No.
Her heart still ached, as if she had left something behind. As if she had lost something precious. Someone. She scrambled to her feet, clutching one of the letters. Her fingers traced the elegant handwriting. James. Flashes of a different time, a different life, flitted through her mind. A bookshop, a proposal, a love that had spanned centuries. And a woman who wanted her to forget. Panic surged through her. She couldn't let it end like this. She wouldn't. Grabbing the pressed violet, she clenched it in her palm, whispering desperately, Take me back. Nothing happened. Her breath hitched. Please. I need to go back. Still nothing. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. Had she lost him forever? Had time finally won? Then, a whisper. Not spoken aloud, but in her mind. A voice she knew too well. Find me. Her breath caught. James. A spark of hope ignited in her chest. If time thought it could keep them apart, it was wrong. Eleanor had spent lifetimes forgetting him. But this time, she would remember. And she would find him. Even if she had to rewrite time itself. Eleanor didn't waste a second. If James had left her a message, if he was still out there, she had to find him. She grabbed the old letters, rereading them, searching for anything she might have missed. A name. A place. A date. Then she saw it. Meet me at the Violet Garden, where time first lost its way. Her breath hitched. Violet Garden. A memory stirred, James pressing a violet into her palm, telling her it was their flower. Heart racing, she rushed downstairs, nearly stumbling as she grabbed her coat. She had to think. If the Violet Garden was real, then it had to exist somewhere in this town. Her grandmother's old journals. She sprinted to the sitting room, yanking an old diary off the shelf. Pages flipped under her shaking fingers until a beautiful garden outside of town, where the violets bloom every spring. James always says it feels like stepping into another time. Eleanor's chest tightened. It was real. And if James was waiting, she had to go. The sun hung low in the sky by the time Eleanor reached the garden. It was tucked away at the edge of town, forgotten by most. Wild violets stretched across the field in waves of purple, swaying gently in the breeze. Her heart pounded. Would he be here? She stepped forward, every nerve in her body alight with anticipation. Then she saw him, standing beneath a twisted oak tree, his back to her, dressed in a dark coat.
James.
Her breath hitched. James. He turned slowly, his gaze meeting hers. For a moment, he was still. Then something like relief flickered across his face. You remembered. His voice was hoarse, as if he barely dared to believe it. Eleanor ran to him, her hands trembling as she grabbed his coat. I remembered. I don't know how, but I did. I fought it. James exhaled sharply, his hands coming up to cup her face, his touch warm and grounding. Eleanor. Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to erase you, but you left me a way back. James swallowed hard, his forehead pressing against hers. I didn't know if it would work. Every time I lose you, every time, you forget. Not this time. Her voice was fierce. I won't let her take you from me again. James hesitated. Eleanor, if you stay, you might never be able to return to your own time. Eleanor's heart twisted. Her family, her life, everything she had ever known. Could she leave it all behind? Could she choose him? Then she remembered the loneliness, the sense that something had always been missing, the way time itself seemed to pull her back to him, again and again. This wasn't just one lifetime. This was every lifetime. She had spent centuries losing him. Now, she had the chance to finally hold on. Eleanor lifted her gaze, eyes burning with resolve. I choose you. James let out a shuddering breath, then crushed her against him, his lips meeting hers in a desperate, timeless kiss. And as the wind swirled around them, the violets whispering in the dusk, time shifted. The cycle broke. And for the first time in forever, they were free. Eleanor gasped as the world around her trembled. The air shimmered, reality bending, warping, then snapping into place. She pulled back from James, her heart hammering. What just happened? James glanced around, his eyes widening. I think we did it. The woman in emerald was gone. The weight of centuries, the curse that had haunted them, had lifted. James turned back to Eleanor, wonder in his gaze. We changed fate. A slow smile spread across her lips. Then this is real. We're finally free. James brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering. No more forgetting. No more losing you. She leaned into his touch. And no more time keeping us apart. For the first time they had won. And this time, it was forever. The violet garden stretched before Eleanor, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. The same place where she had once stood, heart hammering, searching for a man she had loved across lifetimes. Now, years had passed, yet the moment she had chosen to stay with James felt as vivid as yesterday. She ran her fingers over the delicate petals of a violet, inhaling its sweet scent. It was strange how something so small, so fragile, had been the thread that connected them through time. A single pressed violet in an old letter had led her here, had led her to him. Beside her, James sat with his back against the oak tree, his fingers idly tracing patterns along her palm. You're quiet today, he murmured. Eleanor smiled, turning to him. Just thinking. James arched a brow. About. She exhaled, glancing at the horizon. Everything. How we got here. How we broke free. James squeezed her hand. We made our own fate. She looked into his eyes, warm and steady, the same eyes that had searched for her through every cycle, every lifetime. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't remembered you? A shadow crossed James' face, but it passed quickly. He lifted their joined hands, brushing a kiss against her knuckles. I don't have to wonder, Eleanor. I lived it over and over. Her chest tightened. I don't want to forget ever again. You won't, he promised. Not this time. We broke the cycle. She's gone. Time doesn't control us anymore. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The woman in emerald, the one who had erased her memories, who had kept her and James apart for centuries, was truly gone. They had shattered the chains of fate, rewritten their own story. But part of her still feared that it was too good to be true. What if time finds another way to take you from me? She whispered. James turned fully to her, his hands framing her face, his touch grounding. It won't, he said firmly, because this time, we decide what happens. Eleanor swallowed past the lump in her throat. He was right. They were no longer prisoners of the past, no longer lost souls pulled apart by a force beyond their control. Now they had forever. A gentle breeze rustled the violets around them, and Eleanor tilted her head back, soaking in the warmth of the sun. A new thought bloomed in her mind. Do you ever wonder how many versions of us there are? How many times we almost made it? James chuckled. More than I care to count. She smiled softly. But this time we did. And this time, he murmured, brushing his lips against her forehead, we get to live. Silence stretched between them, not empty, but full, of unspoken promises, of a love that had transcended lifetimes. Then Eleanor grinned. So what do we do now? James smirked.
Live.
Love. Travel. See all the things we never got the chance to before. She laughed. You make it sound so simple. He pulled her closer, his lips brushing against hers. It is when I have you. She melted into the kiss, the last remnants of fear slipping away. For the first time in forever, she wasn't running toward something lost. She was right where she belonged. And as the violets whispered in the wind, carrying their love story across time, Eleanor and James stepped into a future that was truly theirs. No more forgetting. No more lost lifetimes. Just them. Together. Forever.